We are truly honored to have with us today one of the most pressing public health issues of our times. For the third straight year, firearms have killed more children and teens in 2017 than any other cause of death, including heart crashes and cancer. And that sobering truth is why we're here. Today's program promises to be enlightening, impactful, and above all, actionable. I invite you to sit back, listen deeply, and fully engage. Together, let's explore what's happening on the ground and discover how each of us can play a role in creating change. It's now my privilege to introduce the President of RWJ University Hospital and Dr. who will help set the stage for today's discussion.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for allowing me to join you as we participate in this important conversation about the impact of gun violence in our communities. As a level 1 trauma center, our team is keenly aware of the serious impact of gun violence within this community. Just this past Thursday, we celebrated 2 of our trauma patient survivors and the teams that cared for them here in our trauma center for our Trauma Survivors Day celebration. One of our honorees that evening was a victim of random and senseless gun violence, as is the survivor that we'll be hearing from today. These 2 incidents and these 2 innocent individuals were going about their daily lives, relaxing at home as any of us would be, and in the case of our survivor today, enjoying what should have been a peaceful and playful time in the park when the gun violence invaded their lives. While statistics from the New Jersey Attorney General's office show that gun violence here in our state is on the decline, the stories of these 2 individuals remind us that there is more work that needs to be done. I think all of us are pleased with the improvement in these efforts, but I also think that all of us would agree that one incident is too many. Here at RWJ, we're proud of the work that our trauma team and our hospital-based violence intervention program does in this space through education and providing support services to survivors of gun violence. And thankfully, there are many organizations throughout the state and throughout the nation, and individuals like each of you who remain committed to addressing this serious public health issue right here. Today, we hope to foster a productive dialogue and exchange of ideas about how we can address this serious issue to ensure that the incidence of gun violence continues to decline here in the great state of New Jersey. We are delighted that we'll be joined today by Mayor Cahill, as well as other elected officials, including Assemblyman Robert RWJ, as well as Assemblywoman Nancy Munoz, and quite frankly, everyone who has taken time out of their busy schedule to join us for this important conversation. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for your participation. And with that, I turn it over to our incredible leader in this space, Dr. Mayur O'Reilly.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning, good afternoon. Before we get started, I do want to have you help me in recognizing Diana Stars for putting together this inaugural symposium. So if you could please join me in thanking Diana. I think it's safe to say that we can all agree the best patient is the one we never see. I have often said that this country lost the battle against gun violence when we tolerated kindergartners getting shot at San Diego. Once you allow that to happen, and we do very little about it, the slope or the angle of difficulty in achieving the work that we need to do gets outcome. But rest assured, with efforts like this and the 91 chairs that you see here, and actually more, every day somebody loses their life in this country. We're the most civilized country in the world. The most civilized. Yet we have the highest rate of death happening because of guns. It is frankly unacceptable. And we're here with distinguished leaders from around the state. I had a chance to meet each one of you. And I meant what I said, that you have the whole commitment of the RWJ Choctaw Center and Choctaw Tour to champion efforts in legislation and to help lead the campaign to end gun violence. So I want to thank you all very much and look forward to an outstanding session. I want to introduce to you somebody who I've already hired one of my faculty members, Dr. Andy, who will be the moderator for this outstanding symposium. Dr. Preston, would you please come up to the stage and let's take this symposium started.
Can you hear me? Great. I will introduce all of our panelists and go through a couple of questions, and hopefully everyone So first we have Dr. Michael Nestis. He's a clinical psychologist, the executive director of the New Jersey Gun Violence Research Center, and a professor at the Rutgers School of Public Health. His research focuses on suicide prevention with an emphasis on firearms suicide, particularly within military and veteran communities. He is the author of over 250 peer-reviewed publications and a book entitled Guns and Suicide, an American Epidemic. Could you please come up to the stage and have a seat? Next, we have Angela Kai. She is the Executive Assistant Attorney General. She's served as the Deputy Solicitor General since 2021, where she's litigated a wide variety of complex cases on behalf of the state. Prior to joining this office, Ms. Kai was an associate at Wilkinson Steklov LLP in New York and Paul Weiss Rifkin, Wharton, and Garrison in DC. She clerked for Judge Michael A. Chigaris of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Third Circuit and Judge Catherine B. Forrest of the U.S. District Court for the Southern District of New York. Ms. Kai received her BA from Princeton University and her JD from Yale Law School. Could you please come up and join us? Next, we have Assemblywoman Nancy Munoz. She is the highest-ranking Republican woman in the legislature, currently serves the Assembly Health Committee, Assembly Budget Committee, and Legislative Services Commission, as well as the New Jersey Task Force on Child Abuse and Neglect. She was appointed by Chief Justice Stuart Rabner to the Supreme Court Ad Hoc Committee on Domestic Violence and continues to work with members of the judiciary, law enforcement, and legislature to ensure that excellent policies and practices are in place across the state to protect victims of domestic violence. She was instrumental in introducing a bill package to close identified gaps in state laws related to the issues of illegal firearms. And she focused on the tremendous challenges New Jersey faces in terms of its public health needs. Ms. Munoz, please come up and join us. Next, we have Dr. Rachel Choron. She is an associate professor of surgery in the ACS division of the Department of Surgery here at Rutgers Robert Wood Johnson. She is a trauma surgeon and an intensivist and serves as the medical director for the shock trauma ICU. She's also the program director for our fellowship in surgical critical care. She's the director of the RACER, or the Rutgers Acute Care Surgery Research Lab, which she built and launched back in 2023. She's the chair of engagement committee for the AAST, which is a major national trauma organization, serves as the committee member for the AAST Multi-Center Trials Committee, as well as the East Manuscript and Literature Review Committee. She's also on the SCCM Steering Committee and Education Committees, and serves on the editorial board for Trauma Surgery and Acute Care Open. She's an NIH-funded researcher and on clinical outcomes research concentrated on firearms violence, hospital violence intervention, and traumatic duodenal injuries, as well as sepsis. Would you please come up and join us, Dr. Choron? Next, we have Assemblyman Robert Karavinchek. He's currently serving his 5th term as representative New Jersey's 18th legislative district. He's served since 2016. Assemblyman Karavinchek currently serves as the chair of the Assembly's State and Local Government Committee and is a member of the Assembly Commerce, Economic Development, and Agricultural Committees. He, along with Assembly Democrats, recently sponsored a package of bills seeking to improve firearm safety and address illegal firearm activity. He's a lifelong resident of Edison, New Jersey, a local business owner, and is working as president of Triform Construction in Metuchen. Could you please come up and join us, Assemblyman Karavinchek? And last but not least, we have Mayor Jim Cahill. He's the 62nd mayor of New Brunswick and a lifelong resident. He served continuously since 1991, guiding the city through a transformation from a declining industrial town to a thriving 21st century urban center. Mayor Cahill has fostered collaboration among the private sector, healthcare institutions, Rutgers, Middlesex County, and the New Brunswick Development Corporation, attracting over $7 billion in investment for housing, retail, office, education, and healthcare development. And the city has become New Jersey's premier healthcare hub in his wake, home to renowned hospitals and medical research centers with strong community outreach. And New Brunswick has experienced an unprecedented drop in crime, with the number cut in half since Mayor Cahill has taken office. All right, so I'd like to kick this panel off. We have about an hour or so. In that time, I'd like to cover a lot of ground, but I'd like to kick the panel off by having everybody just take a minute or two to introduce yourself and talk a little bit about your interest in gun violence and what your role is in the community. We'll start with you, Dr. Choron. Hello. We'll hold that a little further away. I'm Rachel Choron. I'm one of the trauma surgeons here at Rutgers Robert Wood Johnson. So I think, being a trauma surgeon and a mom, this is a very important topic to me. We have had to tell families and parents, break bad news to them all too many times. And I think for me, that is one of the hardest parts of this job. So I'm very passionate about trying to never have to do that again. So that's one of the reasons that I'm very dedicated to trying to prevent gun violence and do everything we can for that.
I'm Jim Cahill. I'm the mayor of the city of Brunswick, a position I've had for several decades now. New Brunswick is certainly not immune from the gun violence crisis that's being experienced not only in our community, throughout the state, and throughout the entire nation. It is something that, as a government official, there's no greater responsibility that we have than the safety of the people that we represent. So despite our best efforts, we continue to slog ahead in an uphill battle to continue to make progress in the prevention of gun violence. So being a part of this panel and being a part of all of you to discuss ways that we can see through to a better future is critically important to me.
Hello. Just have to wait a second. I'm Angela Kai. I am the Executive Assistant Attorney General in the State Attorney General's Office, where I oversee our civil portfolio. And the experience that I have in terms of our office's work in gun violence prevention and enforcement is a few different angles. The first is we are tasked with enforcing the criminal laws of the state, which hopefully prohibits and inhibits people from picking up a firearm and hurting others. Now, we know that that's not always true, unfortunately, and so we do enforce the criminal laws and the consequences that come along with that. Along with that is a set of intelligent policing priorities that we've put together, including our statewide gun violence reduction task force. So on that front, trying to gather intelligence across the state to reduce gun violence from a criminal justice angle. Then there is the community-based violence intervention efforts that our office has been long part of, including the hospital-based violence intervention efforts that I know that this hospital has been engaging in for the past 5 years. And I want to talk more about that later on. But then as a litigator, we also do defend the laws that our legislature has passed, the rules of the road for who can have a firearm, where, and when, and make sure that those laws still apply and that people are abiding by them. And so taking those to courts. And then finally, there's an element of enforcing the civil firearm laws, and that's holding gun industry members accountable for practices that harm public safety, be it selling ghost guns into the state or not taking reasonable controls to prevent gun theft, which then leads to more violence. And so these are some of the things that our office is doing and some of the work that we're involved in.
Hi everybody, Mike Nestis. I'm the Executive Director of the New Jersey Gun Violence Research Center at the GVRC. My life's work in this space has been firearm suicide prevention. I think a lot of folks aren't really aware that 60% of the gun deaths in the United States are suicide deaths, and 55% of all the suicide deaths in the United States are gun deaths. But in my role as the Executive Director of the GVRC, I really had to think about all forms of gun violence. And there are really some three things that our group does to try and contribute to the cause of gun violence prevention. The first, as a research center, is to conduct research to better understand what causes gun violence, what tools do we have that are effective, how can we implement them in ways that reach the communities that can most benefit. We also know fund gun violence research. The federal government has historically not done a whole lot of that, so we try to fill the void and fill the field by encouraging scientists to come into this space. We fund their work so that they can bring their sort of brilliance to the efforts of preventing gun violence. And the third thing we do that I think makes us a little unusual, but I wish scientists would do more of generally, is we try to communicate the science of gun violence prevention to the communities that benefit from it. Science is only useful if it actually reaches the communities that need it. So we work really hard to make sure that the data gets into the hands of the policymakers, the community members, the loss survivors, so that they can make data-driven demands of the folks who implement programs or advocate for policies. And I'll talk about all that more as we go along, but I appreciate you guys being here.
One, two, three. Hi, my name is Nancy Munoz. I'm an Assemblywoman from Legislative District 21. I am a registered nurse. I'm the only nurse in the state legislature. I spent more than 35 years as a nurse in the trauma center at Yale New Haven and at Mass General, surgical ICU at both places, recovery room at Bellevue, the emergency departments. I know firsthand what bullets do to a body. My husband, my late husband, was Dr. Eric Munoz, for which the Level 1 Trauma Center in Newark is now named. So we have lived this as a family. My oldest son trained there in orthopedic surgery, which many of the patients in the trauma bay go on to orthopedics, as many of you know, because of orthopedic injuries. And my youngest is a PGY 4, about to be 5, in general surge going into trauma. So again, our family knows this, has lived this. I was 18 years old. No, he was 18 years old. I was 22. His name was Nick. I was at Yale New Haven. I was a young nurse. He was shot in the abdomen. I was his nurse from the first day post-op till as he was recovering and was able to take limited fluids. He was only allowed 30 cc's of fluids per hour orally, and all he wanted was Fanta orange soda. And I was also there when he died. I was there with his parents when he died. So I have, again, seen firsthand the impact of gun violence on the patient, on the family, on the communities, and on the providers. Gun violence is not only a criminal justice issue, it's a public health crisis. And we need to treat gun violence the way we treat other health issues, such as stroke, heart disease, or addiction. And we frame it as a public health issue. We gain clarity. We identify risk factors, we intervene early, and we measure outcomes. That also means putting politics aside, on both sides, which too often overlook the common sense we rely on every day as healthcare professionals. Patients don't care about party labels, they care about solving the problem, but we must take an unbiased, educated approach, not stoked by partisan rhetoric. We'll go into, as we go along, further issues that I have dealt with as I introduce all the legislation on the ghost guns and have done other things in the issues of domestic violence, etc. But I just wanted to have that introduction to let you all know that I know firsthand what the patients, the victims, and the providers experience, and how we can work together collectively to hopefully to end gun violence as a community. So thank you.
Hi, thank you. I'm State Assemblyman Rob Carrigan, and it's an honor to be here today. And I want to thank Robert Wood Johnson for hosting this event, and all the vendors that are here supplying their information for everyone to be able to get a piece of and understand more about gun violence. I especially want to thank all of the doctors and nurses, first responders who deal with this every single day. It's not talked about. It's not discussed. You see it on TV every once in a while, but you live it, and you save lives, attempt to save lives, all because of gun violence. As was discussed by the other panelists, just to start, there's so much legislation that we're looking at. For myself, I believe education is the most important piece of this. We could have all the laws you want on the books, but unless we educate our youth and our adults about guns, how to handle them, and be safe with them, if they have them, and not be able to get them into the hands of people that should not have a gun, is so important. So I'm sure that this will be discussed in the next half an hour. So thank you.
Thank you, everybody. I look forward to hearing your responses to some of these questions because I think it's going to dig down a little bit deeper into some of these issues. So why don't we actually get started with the two assembly people sitting at the end of the table. So I'm going to ask the same questions to both of you, just kind of take turns answering. So firstly, are there any upcoming policy changes or legislative efforts related to gun violence in New Jersey that we should be aware of?
Well, thank you very much. First, I have to say we have some of the toughest gun laws in the country. I think we're all aware of that. That unfortunately does not stop gun violence. So our goal obviously is to end gun violence. But in the meantime, I do have a piece of legislation which I'm going to work with the trauma centers on, which is on Stop the Bleed policy. To get information out, the same way we did with AEDs, to have a Stop the Bleed kit across the state, available for everyone, to have every single person who graduates from high school get information about Stop the Bleed. Because if we can do that, we all know about the golden hour of trauma. We're very much aware of that. If we can stop the bleeding or slow down the bleeding to get them to the trauma bay before their heart has stopped and that they have died, then we can do a first step. So my youngest son, who I told you is at University Hospital, spent three stints in Africa, 2 in Ghana and 1 in Sierra Leone during this past year. And he taught 250 people from Ghana, he went to Ghana twice, and 250 people in Sierra Leone about Stop the Bleed. He certified them. They can do it, we can do it here. This would involve passing legislation to say that it was to be placed as part of education of all students. It's a terrible echo. But also, we have AEDs in most locations. We know how to manage this process. Let's put a Stop the Bleed pack everywhere. And this doesn't just apply to gun violence. This applies to whether you have a weather event or when you have broken panes of glass. We've seen that when there was one of the hurricanes that somebody was saved their lives by applying a tourniquet. This would give people the information in order to help prevent that death before they get to the trauma bay. The other thing that I think is really important is the initiatives that University Hospital in Newark have done, and I don't know if you're doing them here, but the Trauma Recovery Center and the Trauma Survivorship Programs. They've been having tremendous success there with these programs for those who have survived trauma, for their families, and to look at those and make sure we have those at all the trauma centers and across the state, because they're really helpful for the families and for the survivors. On May 1st, there was Trauma Appreciation Day at University Hospital, and we went there, I went there with Dr. Fox, who's the head of trauma there, and we had a survivor speak. And the importance of these programs as patients who have survived going forward. So those are 2 of the things that I think are really important as we go forward. And as I said before, I'm working on I introduced this 6-bill package on ghost guns. It has gone through the Assembly for the most part. It is still waiting to be heard in the Senate. So if you want to help on that regard, encourage your senators to get that legislation moving, because it was ways that we could help. We identified through a commission what the problems with the ghost guns are, and these pieces of legislation addressed all of those issues related to ghost guns. So together, we can help the Senate get this through and get it to the governor's desk so that we can help to prevent fatalities and lethalities and trauma from ghost guns. Thank you.
Thank you. Some other legislation in the Assembly now and also in the Senate. There's going to be an increase in crimes related to the illegal sale of guns, second degree to a first degree crime. My own legislation, along with Nancy's, has to do with the digital printing for ghost guns. That terminology that's there is just going to be accentuated in the future with AI. That's coming, and we all know it. We're dealing with it every single day. This is something we have to address, and we have to be in front of it, not behind it. And I think we're already behind it. So we're pushing on the assembly side. Again, yes, the Senate has to react to these. We're hoping that this does happen. I can't see it's going to happen in the next 2 weeks. But this is something that we believe is a bipartisan position here. Gun violence transcends any party there is. It's about humanity. That's what this is about. And being civil to each other. There's other legislation that's out there with unfortunately reckless discharge of a firearm. That to me turns into education. You have to educate somebody who's touching the gun, handling the gun. Can't always be the parents, it's the children too that touch the guns. They don't have a fear because their parents don't have a fear. Maybe their parents teach them the right things to do and they feel it's comfortable that they can handle it. It has to be more education than just the parent. It has to be coming from the teachers, doctors, nurses, anywhere that we could possibly touch a person and a young adult about this. This to me is so important. There's other legislation that's being talked about. You know how everybody eventually has to renew a license like an electrician every 3 years? Or this is being talked about that if you own a gun, you have to take a test, a psychological test, and renew your license every 3 years. This is something that's being talked about. There's no legislation on this now. But I think that this is a good step to do this. This is my opinion. Thank you.
It's really refreshing to hear two people in the Assembly that are very concerned about this issue. It sounds like on both sides of the party line, we're addressing this and this is a concern. So that's amazing to hear, addressing it both from a preventative education standpoint, the guns themselves for the recovery after discharge. So I'm excited to see where you guys go with that. Happy to help in any way that we can. My next question for you guys is, what policy changes specifically would you like to see in place to better prevent or respond to violence itself here in New Jersey and or in the United States?
We're going to focus on New Jersey. I think we can agree that we get a lot of, I'm sure Senator Karavinchek and our offices get a lot of questions that have to do with federal policy, and we are strictly the state policy. So I did identify a few things as I was getting prepared for this. So we talked about the ghost guns, but we also have to look at some of the loopholes in bail reform. So we passed bail reform, but it's been left up to the discretion of the judges whether or not to hold somebody before approving pretrial release. But we should be looking at whether serious gun offenses those who commit serious gun offenses should not be released early on pretrial release. The other thing is, as you said in my introduction, I was on the ad hoc committee on domestic violence in the state of New Jersey, and we worked on 25, 26, 27 different pieces of legislation regarding domestic violence. So I've been doing that for 10 years. We require anyone convicted of domestic violence or subject to a final restraining order to surrender their firearms. And we have to make sure that policy, that law is followed. We've also been working on issues regarding mental health issues and red flag laws. It's really important that, first of all, that everybody have a background check before they have a gun purchase. And being careful, because I've worked with a psychologist and a psychiatrist, and making that balance of when we identify a patient or an individual who suffers from depression or threat of self-harm or harm to others, that professional speak with that patient about giving over his or her firearm to put it into safe holding until they get through the crisis. I know that our red flag laws say that we remove them, but the psychologists and psychiatrists are concerned, and maybe you'll help us with this issue, that some of the people who are gun owners will no longer be going for psychiatric care because of it. That was a concern. So we have to have a balance there to make sure we protect the patients from self-harm and harming others, while at the same time making sure that they get the psychiatric or psychological help that they need. So background checks, domestic violence, mental health issues, and those are the things that we are working on.
Thank you, Nancy. Yes, anything to do with safety is so important. We look at different levels of crime, and when we see an increase in juvenile crime in this state, and it's happening all across the state for various reasons, whether it's car thefts, whether they're home invasions, whether they're robberies. These young children and adults are being used, and the crime is going to them. They're being held. Unfortunately, that's not the court. We have to get that next step, that who's giving them the guns, who's selling them guns, who's using these young adults for this. That's what we want to try to penetrate and get to, because those are the people who should be put in jail. The bail reform, I think we have to look at it again. I agree. Onset, it was the right thing, but now it has to be tweaked and adjusted according to what we're seeing. You know, nothing is ever perfect, and it's always there for change. And I think that one of the things, as a bipartisan event here, we should be changing things for the betterment and the safety of every single individual in the great state of New Jersey. And hopefully this will transcend into the other states of this great nation.
Fantastic. Thank you both. This next set of questions is going to be for Dr. Anestis. So we have here in New Jersey, the gun law changed in 2022, causing the number of concealed carry weapon license applications to soar, with over 32,000 permits issued between July of 2022 through February of 2024. Can you help us to understand if there's a relationship between the number of concealed carry permits and community violence?
Yeah, absolutely. So the data on this is one of those times where, as a scientist, I can say, actually, it's not ambiguous at all. I don't really need to watch my tone. The data is very clear and consistent. When states loosen their concealed carry laws, you see a surge in firearm homicides, you see a surge in firearm assaults, you see a surge in homicide and assaults overall across methods, you see a surge in officer-involved shootings. And so what all of that means is you also have a surge in gun violence exposure. And what we know, again, from study after study after study, is where there's more gun violence exposure, there's higher levels of depression symptoms, there's greater odds of suicidal thoughts and behaviors, there's greater amounts of physical impairment and impairment in daily living, and all that goes into that for the victims and their families. And so as concealed carry laws lessen, concealed carry practices increase, you see more injury, more death, and then all the sort of echoing effects that come after the incident itself.
Wow. That's really, thank you for that. It's really startling, and I wish maybe that information was a little bit more widely known, right? My next question for you would be, can you tell us about the connection between firearm suicide prevention and community safety?
Sure. I think of firearm suicide prevention as a community safety issue, and community safety different than in the sense we think about with community violence, right? Community safety in the sense that there are members of our community out there at risk for firearm suicide, but not readily identified as such at a time. And so what's unfortunate about firearm suicide is that the folks most likely to die by suicide using a firearm are the ones least likely to actually seek out mental health care. So a lot of times our solutions for suicide prevention involve waiting for someone to come in and say, I'm having a hard time, and directing the evidence-based care. And as a psychologist, I love that, except that tool's over here, and the people are over here. We also know that when folks have suicidal thoughts of a firearm, they're more likely to store the firearm unsecured, which means they're not getting help from us, they're not identified as high risk, and they have the quickest, most ready access to a suicide method that is deadly 90 to 95% of the time. And so firearm suicide prevention is an issue of community safety in the sense that we're having a hard time seeing where the risk is, and that's why so often the story after a suicide death in the United States is, I never saw that coming from loved ones, because that person hadn't told anyone. They hadn't been identified in the system. They hadn't been routed to care. They suffered in silence. And their family members didn't do anything wrong. There wasn't any way for them to know or have done something. It wasn't a failure on their part. It's simply difficult to access the suffering of someone who doesn't tell you about it. And so what my team spends a lot of time doing is thinking about this as a primary prevention problem. That means you get out there and provide tools for safety before the problem is identified. You don't tell someone to buy a fire extinguisher once their house is on fire. You tell someone to have a fire extinguisher in case their house catches fire. So we use an intervention called Project Safeguard, for instance, where we talk to folks, regardless of whether they're suicidal or not now, about ways that fit within their value system and home situation, where either now or under some circumstances, they store their firearms more securely in their home, or even consider voluntarily, legally, and temporarily storing them outside of home during times of crisis to really make that environment less vulnerable for suicide. So this is a complicated community safety environment, but it's one that requires us to think outside the box, to not wait for the problem to come to us, and to not only offer up solutions that fit our perspective, but in fact to look through the lenses to folks who need to hear from us and make sure we're offering solutions that meet them where they're at and align with their values. Otherwise, they're never going to take hold.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I know as a trauma surgeon, we see this all the time. Unfortunately, self-inflicted harm to the firearms, and it's just like you said, you know, I don't know where this came from, it was out of nowhere, and, you know, often we know that suicide is, you know, maybe a snap decision if you have a firearm readily available, and so that decision ends up being deadly. So I thank you so much for your work and your data that's helping address this issue. And next, let's talk with Angela Kai. Can you share any successful strategies or initiatives that have reduced gun violence in the state?
Yeah, so let me talk a little bit about the good news to the extent that we're looking for a little hope here. In the past 3 years, firearms, or rather shooting incidents in the state have been the lowest that they have been since the state started tracking them in 2009. So that is cause for cautious celebration. But in 2024, this is the lowest number we have on record, 778 people were shot, and of those, 152 were fatalities. That's still 778 too many. And what we're trying to do is approach the problem in a lot of different ways. And I mentioned some of them, but I want to highlight a few that I think are intersect with some of the things that other panelists have mentioned. The Gun Violence Reduction Task Force allows information to be shared among law enforcement statewide so that, for example, when a judge is making a determination about whether an individual needs to be detained prior to their trial, we have bail reform so that decision is no longer based on their ability to pay bail, but rather on dangerousness. But how does the judge make that decision? They need information. And the task force allows one county prosecutor's office who's prosecuting the case to be able to obtain information about that defendant based on their past history, their associations with prior shootings, and so that's information that the judge can actually take into account that may have slipped through the cracks if there was not this kind of coordination. So from a law enforcement intelligence gathering perspective, we do think that helps a lot in terms of the individual acute cases where the decision to release back in the community could actually have dangerous implications. So that's from a law enforcement side, just one example. But I also want to highlight the laws that have been passed by the legislature. Some of them are recent, but some of them have been around for decades and decades. So the red flag law that was signed in 2018, this is our extreme risk protective order law that allows either members of the family or law enforcement to identify individuals who pose a really acute risk to themselves and others, and then an application is made before a judge to temporarily disarm them. This is something that we take for granted after it's passed, but it's constantly getting challenged because individuals think, I shouldn't be shouldn't be allowed, I shouldn't be put under this, obviously involuntarily, but I think it actually does save lives. And so our office's job is not only to make sure that law enforcement have the tools to make those applications to a court and to do so in a way that protects the due process rights of the individuals who are affected, but also to make sure that the law stays on the books, because once they're off the books, they can't protect us anymore. And I think I have the stats right, Dr. Nessus can correct me, but I think New Jersey has one of the lowest gun suicide rates in the nation. It could be because we're all really happy people. That may be true if you're Hawaii, but I'm not sure if that explains it, right? I do think that our laws and the interventions that both community advocates and people in the nonprofit space, in healthcare and in government actually do make a difference. And so things like doing a background check that has a mental health safety component before someone purchases a firearm or gets a permit to carry a firearm. I think that's important. And even though we are nervous about the implications of having concealed carry, which the Supreme Court mandated across the whole nation, it came with the legislature's guardrails around where you can carry, how you can carry, right, in a safety holster, which I'm not sure other states that have gone that way have all adopted. So these measures can help save lives, both in the interpersonal violence space as well as in the suicide prevention space. And I do hope that we continue to have success in the courts, but also in the communities, in making sure that these laws actually work.
Fantastic. Thanks for sharing some of the stuff New Jersey is doing, and it does sound like we're doing better than a lot of places, but still have a lot of room to grow. Switching gears slightly, more towards the community, how are resources being allocated in New Jersey to support victims and communities that are suffering from gun violence?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think what our office is trying to do is approach community-based violence intervention as one of the many tools that's equally important to law enforcement and the legal tools. So over the past, I want to say 4 or 5 years, our office has partnered with community organizations and hospitals to do hospital-based violence intervention. And what does that mean? It means that when a victim of a shooting comes to the trauma center, they receive bedside social services and linkages to care that they may need to go back to their communities to heal, and everything from linking up with mental health support to housing to other needs they may have, with people who are well versed in what it is that they're facing in their communities. Many of the coordinators are bilingual, and I think one of the things that drives a lot of this is data and statistics, and the statistic is that victims of gun violence are more likely to become future victims of gun violence. What we're trying to do is to use the tools not just of law enforcement, which is a blunt instrument, but with providers at the hospitals, community support, to provide individuals the tools to escape from the cycle of gun violence. So that's one. There is a new initiative to pair. So we've been funding community-based violence intervention, not just in the hospital sense, but also in the community organizations for a long time. But most recently, we've issued guidance to law enforcement agencies across the state, giving them guidance for how to work with these community organizations, which may not think of themselves as directly linked up to law enforcement, to try to bridge that divide. And our county prosecutors and our Office of Victim Intervention and Victim Awareness are helping make that linkage so that law enforcement and community members and the supporters can actually work together. And then finally, this is the nerd in me, but we have used our Office of Justice data to make sure that communities that themselves suffer from disproportionate rates of gun violence can advocate for themselves by sharing and publicizing data about shootings that those communities can use in their advocacy with elected leaders and other representatives. And so that's one of the more maybe unusual ways that we can think of the work that we do on data to be actually victim advocacy and victim centric, so that people can actually get transparency into what's happening in the communities.
Amazing. I know our RWJ has been instrumental for our victims of gun violence here in our hospital, and it sounds like there's a lot of work going on at tackling all facets of the community, because it really isn't just an issue, one item issue. It really addresses multiple aspects of the community. My next questions are going to be for Mayor Cahill. What changes have you seen in New Brunswick during your tenure since 1991 related to how violence is being addressed in this community in particular?
Thank you. First of all, I think it's important to note, particularly from a municipality's perspective, how fortunate we are to be in the state of New Jersey. And I say that because New Jersey leads the way in crime from gun violence prevention, well below the state average. In 2021, when there was a spike in gun violence and gun homicides throughout the country, and quite frankly, a spike here in the city of New Brunswick as well. New Jersey's gun murder rate was 55% lower than the national rate. And I think this is a direct reflection of the state's stronger laws, its strict enforcement, its collaborative policing, and prevention efforts like those that Angela mentioned, background checks, safe storage, and limited carry policies that exist here in our state. In addition to that, New Jersey's overall gun death rate was the 4th lowest in the country according to the CDC, which is the latest data that I have. Now, gun death rate includes both homicide and suicide. So New Jersey, again, is at the top of the ledger sheet when it comes to those things. So when it comes to how we do this at the local level, we have the advantage of working with our partners in a multi-jurisdictional effort. We emphasize rigorous implementation and enforcement of the current statutes that are available to us in the city. That includes strict enforcement of state storage rules, the maximal use of red flag laws to remove guns from high-risk individuals. We also participate fully in programs like Project Exile, violent offender task forces, as well as interstate gun runner investigations with our federal partners that we get the opportunity to work with. We also take advantage of New Jersey's comprehensive approach with strong laws and data sharing, which have become effective. In 2024 National Institute of Justice study observed that New Jersey's cross-jurisdictional intelligence in sharing ballistic, arrest, and crime data has really helped to keep New Jersey homicides relatively stable while the national rate has surged. Critical to New Brunswick is the targeting of illegal guns. We've, again, in a multi-jurisdictional among both federal and state partners and other local law enforcement agencies in the state, we have really enhanced our efforts to stem the flow of guns into New Jersey. The ATF trace data shows that in 2022, over 50% of the firearms that are seized in New Jersey come from out of state. For example, 617 have been traced to Pennsylvania and 469 to the state of Georgia. So we certainly work with our federal and state partners on tracing those guns and trying to eliminate it, but it certainly demonstrates the need for stronger federal gun trafficking bills and more law enforcement agencies on the federal level to investigate interstate gun smuggling networks. These actions have had a positive impact in New Brunswick, where we share a similar trend to the state of New Jersey. What we've seen is that most shootings in New Brunswick involve victims and suspects with long criminal histories, firearms offenses, drug crimes, and other violence. And nearly all involve illegal guns, firearms that should never have been in the individual's hands to begin with. But we realized early on that enforcement is only part of the solution, and that there is no way we're going to be able to arrest our way out of this problem. So we become involved in community violence interventions by investing in proven programs that interrupt the cycle of retaliation. For example, violence interruption teams like Cure Violence and or Ceasefire that deploy trained mediators and outreach workers to de-escalate conflicts and connect at-risk individuals to services. We're happy to partner and support and work with the Robert Wood Johnson University Hospital's Violence Intervention Program, where staff members meet survivors at the most critical moment while they're in the emergency room, providing trauma counseling, case management, and support services to reduce retaliation or re-injury. Programs like these really do save lives, not only by healing the physical wounds, but by addressing the deep psychological trauma that gun violence inflicts. We also support youth engagement programs, mental health services, and employment opportunities that steer at-risk individuals away from the cycle of crime. Through these measures, we continue to make improvements in how we treat and deal with the prevention of gun violence, and we continue to see progress here in the city of Brunswick.
Amazing. And Mayor Cahill actually addressed my second question regarding community interventions as well, so I thank you for that. And, you know, I don't know what it's like working anywhere else, but I am very proud and happy to see the commitment that we have from the city of New Brunswick to all of our intervention programs here in the hospital. I'm not sure it's like that everywhere, but I think it's really fantastic and it's an amazing effort. Last but not least, let's go to Dr. Choron, my partner. She's going to talk a little bit about the clinician side and research side of things, how it is from our perspective. So my first question is, what are some ways healthcare providers can approach the topic of gun safety with their patients?
This is such an important topic. Thank you for asking this. Firstly, I just wanted to say to the panelists, this has been such an inspiring and impactful panel, just to hear your answers already. I think being involved in some of these initiatives on the ground, to hear our policymakers talk about them so passionately, really drives home these missions. So talking about Stop the Bleed, I can tell you that Diana helps organize a vast array of Stop the Bleed programs in New Jersey, and we have students here who also help teach those and manage those programs, so those are really important to us. I also carry a tourniquet with me everywhere I go, in every bag, in all of our cars. It's in my office right now, so it's something easy you can do. You can purchase it on Amazon. We have patients that come in who've applied their own tourniquets, who the first responder may have been a nurse that was not part of the EMS, and those lives were saved because of tourniquets. So very important. And speaking about our hospital violence intervention programs, our whole hospital violence intervention program team is here today, and so I know that is especially important to our group. So in talking about our approach to gun safety and how to bring that up with our patients, you know, I think we approach this as we would any public health issue. You know, we talk about seatbelts, we talk about smoking cessation, we talk about safe sleep for infants. So this is something that we need to talk about and feel open to talk about. I think if it's rooted in compassion and respect and non-judgment, it provides the best opportunities for engagement with our patients and honest conversations where they don't feel judged. It should be part of routine care. I think this is becoming more of a conversation in primary care, in primary pediatric care, but it should also be something that we do in surgery, in all of our specialties, really. And opening these topics up with open-ended questions can be very helpful. Do you have firearms in your home? You know, it's just a great opener. We have over 400 million guns in this country, more guns than people. So it shouldn't be a stigmatized topic. It's just something that's out there and acceptable to talk about with our patients. And I think the main thing is that it's about harm reduction and not judgment.
Couldn't agree more. And what is your opinion on how or who we should be screening for the risk of future violence in the hospital setting specifically?
You know, I think universal screening is very important for this topic. Just as I mentioned, we have so many guns in this country and so many people affected by violence, specifically firearm violence. I don't think that this should be a targeted approach. Interestingly, we just led a screening research project. Dr. Teichman is the PI and author on that paper. Looking specifically at different types of screening. And so when we screen for intimate partner violence, we do that universally for all of our patients who come into the ER. And we found that certain patients would be identified right off the bat with that. But then we implemented in our trauma service screening the day after presentation. So when our trauma patients come into the ER, we do something called primary and secondary surveys. That's within seconds to minutes of them hitting the door, us evaluating them, diagnosing them, treating them for what injuries they may have. The tertiary survey happens on hospital day one, and that's an opportunity where now we have a little bit more of a relationship with our patients. Hopefully we've created a little bit more trust, and maybe that opportunity to have these conversations exists a little bit more. And so what Dr. Teichman found was that more additional patients actually were identified to be survivors of intimate violence, intimate partner violence on that tertiary screen. And so it was really additive to the universal screen. So I think this really is an example of how to do firearm violence screening as well, to take a universal approach and then specifically ask follow-up questions to patients that may be higher risk.
Yeah, I totally agree. And you know, that paper was, I decided to write that paper and look at that based on doing a practice management guideline for the Eastern Association for the Surgery of Trauma, because there was really no literature on this topic. And what I think we've, as a community, realized is our trauma patients are at unique risk for a lot of things: domestic violence, gun violence, mental health issues. And as providers, we have them, you know, all to ourselves. We can see them every morning, we see them on their own, and we can talk to them about these things and potentially make a really huge impact. So I couldn't agree with you more. I think universal screening is imperative in a lot of these issues, and I think we can help people with more than just their acute physical traumatic injuries. I'm not sure where we are on time. Diana, are we good to ask that final question? I'm going to ask one more question to the panel. We're good on time? Yeah. Okay, good. So I just, you know, I think we've been relatively hopeful. I think New Jersey's doing pretty good. But I do want to ask the panelists just to take a moment or two to just mention what gives you hope that we can make a meaningful progress in preventing gun violence, and how each of us can contribute to contributing to this safer community.
I'll start. You know, I think some of the hope I see is right here. You know, being able to be in an interdisciplinary team, seeing the approach to improve firearm violence on so many different fronts, and making headway in this state is really inspiring. I think the main thing is that firearm violence is not inevitable, it's not accidental, it's preventable. And so I think that is what many of the people in this room are working towards. I'm also inspired by our Level 1 Trauma Center and seeing our healthcare system devote resources to our team and try and push forward these initiatives. And I think hearing about the policy changes and future initiatives is also really inspiring in terms of how we can improve this problem.
Well, I think it's important to note that there is now growing public support for safety laws. National polls show near universal American support for strengthening gun laws, especially on background checks. So if further regulation is popularly favored, why have the efforts to reduce violence through gun control failed, and more often than not, failed miserably? One reason might simply be because the discussions have focused on the rights of people to own guns, which is often perceived as taking rights away from somebody. And I don't know about you, but in my household, taking something away from someone rarely goes well. So it creates controversy that never really produces meaningful results. But if we approach gun violence as a public health issue, there may be a greater possibility of finding common ground. And while the Second Amendment is certainly respected, American attitudes now seem to favor common sense safety measures. Public health experts emphasize treating gun violence as a preventable epidemic. For example, Johns Hopkins notes firearm suicide is now the leading cause of death for U.S. children and teens, which certainly highlights a need for early intervention. Now, this approach has worked well in other areas. Take, for example, the auto industry. We have seen that public health measures save lives. Mandatory regulations such as seatbelts, airbags, crash tests, and other safety regulations have dramatically reduced car fatalities by 85% over the last 75 years. Through thoughtful gun safety policies, we can also prevent needless deaths. Lastly, I think we should take advantage of smart technology that exists today to prevent guns winding up and being used by the wrong hands. There are over 200,000 guns reported lost or stolen every year. By requiring something like fingerprint identification for a gun or for a storage box or safe where a gun is held, similar to a cell phone, a gun could not be used if it was lost or stolen or even taken by a small child. So in some of the things I talked about before, which gives me hope and why it's great to be in New Jersey, and if other jurisdictions were able to follow the same types of things, I want to commend Robert Wood Johnson for its leadership in hospital-based violence intervention, which is a strong way and a way to duplicate that effort. We can also make a difference by investing further in community violence interrupters, where those trained individuals who mediate conflict before they erupt into violence. Anything we can do to support youth engagement programs, mental health services, and employment opportunities that steer individuals away from the cycle of crime. Adopting common sense measures like universal background checks on every gun sale, smart technology to prevent unauthorized firearm use, and mandatory reporting of all stolen guns and resales. Measures like these are supported by the vast majority of Americans, including responsible gun owners. These measures can make a difference without infringing on others' lawful rights. And most of all, thanks to each and every one of you and people like you for your dedication to this cause. Together we can and will make a difference.
From my perspective, I think the hope comes in two forms. The first is that New Jersey is a state that is not shy about innovation in firearms prevention policy. So we were one of the first states to enact an assault weapons ban in 1990. That's 4 years before the federal law went into effect, and it lasted decades after the federal law expired. And that's still protecting us today. Now, unfortunately, while litigating the case, which is still ongoing, and challenge the assault weapons ban, my team and I had to pause many, many times while we were writing legal briefs to give a moment of silence to mass shootings that have happened elsewhere that were perpetrated by legal purchasers of the very firearms that we are not permitting in our state. And so there is definitely a bittersweetness to sort of the law that has protected us, that is under challenge, and how we use that right now. But we were also one of the first states, if not the first state, in 2018 to address the issue of 3D printed guns and ghost guns. Now there's constant improvements on the law, as the Assemblywoman has mentioned, but that was an innovation that New Jersey had nationwide to recognize the changes in technology that make our existing safeguards not as effective, because now, believe it or not, people can download blueprints off the internet and use a $300 printer to print a gun that is actually functional. And that is terrifying. But the fact that New Jersey recognized that was a problem and dealt with it through the legal process early, I think is something that we should all be very proud of and continue to hold sight of. And then the other thing that makes me hopeful is young people. And I think it's, again, bittersweet because it took all of these horrific events. I went to school in the Columbine generation. It definitely gave many of us a sense of, okay, this is a problem, but I think that has now become amplified in a way that didn't really exist for us, unfortunately. And in our work, we work with a lot of organizations. March for Our Lives is an organization of young people who have been affected by gun violence, and they're trying to do what they can to advocate for change, and I think that's incredibly inspiring. And there are young lawyers in my office who went to law school in order to try to make a difference on gun violence prevention from a legal angle, which I don't think I knew as a person when I was going to law school who was thinking about that. So I think that because of the problems that we have as society that's faced from a public health perspective, the epidemic of gun violence has created urgency, especially amongst the young generation. And I really, really hope that that continues to snowball into actual change. And I'm sure that at the hospital you're also seeing a lot of medical students and residents who are similarly inspired to make a difference, probably more directly than going to law school. We'll take over that.
Yeah, I see hope from a few places, and I think, as someone who works in gun violence research, it's very easy to assume that I wouldn't see a lot of hope because there's not a lot of funding. Even in the state of New Jersey, they proposed to slash our funding, right? But I have the great privilege in my position at GVRC of having had a huge number of students, trainees, early career scientists come and work with us. And it's not just that the number of them increases, the thoughtfulness of their work, the innovativeness of their work also increases with every passing year. And so an environment that is sort of hostile to the existence of their field, the increasing passion of these young folks who will have 30 or 40-year careers in this field and train more and more people gives me a lot of hope, because that kind of momentum is really, really difficult to stop. And the fact is all the levers that have previously been successful in stopping it are failing in that way. So that gives me hope that they can't stop that. Also, from my position, seeing the increased number, but also just inventiveness of getting grant applications that come to us, it shows me there's just more people thinking about this and coming up with innovative solutions. And I have the great and privileged position to invest in those causes and see them yield fruit. And the last thing I'll say about what gives me hope is just that I've had the opportunity to work with folks who historically you wouldn't expect to have been involved in this conversation, because people have stepped outside of bubbles and echo chambers. And so I mentioned Project Safeguard, the intervention we do to promote secure storage. We're rolling it out across the National Guard, but the states we've worked with so far include, or are scheduled to work with, include New Mexico, Oklahoma, South Carolina, Mississippi, Alabama, states that are not in blue bubbles, states that are inundated with firearms, states you wouldn't necessarily think are part of this, and yet they're reaching out and hungry for these types of interventions. That gives me hope that, again, these conversations can extend into the places that need them most.
I think it's on. First, I want to take this opportunity to acknowledge the work that trauma centers do across this state and across the country. The lives that you all save, I've seen firsthand, like I said in my introduction, people who otherwise would not survive, that have survived because of the work that you do. When my husband died in March of 2009, 2 weeks before his death, there was an editorial in the Star-Ledger which said, "Credit the surgeons." I put his face on that op-ed. I put it up on in my pantry in my house. From 2009 until I moved in 2021, I kept it there. because I acknowledge the work that you all do. The surgeons, the nurses, the techs, EMS, all of what you do, that gives me hope too. If we can get this stop the bleed legislation, what the public can do, all leading to success in saving lives. That needs to be acknowledged, and so all of you, I thank you. Also, having programs such as this give me hope. The fact that we have a bipartisan representation from the Assembly, and that we are working collaboratively, despite what many of you may think, we do work in the state of New Jersey very collaboratively on legislation, because this issue is very important. And so you can see that we've identified some gaps in some of the legislation, and that some of them, Karabinchik and myself and others, will work to put stop gaps, to put a tourniquet on those, if you will, or put gauze in that bleed to stop, to correct and make it even, to make it better. We identify this as a public health issue. That we recognize that whether you wear scrubs, a badge, or hold elected office, our charge is the same, which is to prevent needless loss of life. I think collectively together, we have hope for the future, that as we recognize the need for background checks, as we recognize the need for training, as we recognize that nobody knows what their dominant eye is when they go to shoot a gun until they go for training. I've learned all of these things, you know, I don't know them, but just saying. But these are really important, I think, and so I have hope as we move forward. I think we'll always need a trauma center, and we're grateful that they're there. But hopefully that those numbers of survivors will continue to increase, and that your jobs and what you've done will make a true impact on all the survivors. So I want to thank you all for coming today, for having us here, and for giving us an opportunity to share what we're doing together for the people of New Jersey.
Thank you. All I can say is I'm an optimist, and I believe in all of us here. In my life, I've seen so much change, and I'm sure in your life, you've seen so much change in the last 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. Well, I believe working together, we're going to have a loud voice. And that's what's needed today, a loud voice in various ways, speaking with people, social media, all of our different disciplines, who we talk to different people, will make a difference. This is just another step that we have to make sure we continue. This will make our community safer. Educating our young children, our young adults, and our adults will make a difference. And I believe that together, we all can make a safer New Jersey, and more important, a safer humanity with guns in it. Thank you.
Thank you. Amazing. And I just want to echo Dr. Narayan. Thank you, Diana, for putting together this fantastic multidisciplinary panel, bipartisan, all walks of the trauma research and care gamut. I know for me, I'm currently getting my master's in public health, so Assemblywoman Munoz, I really appreciate what you said about this being a public health issue, because this is one of the reasons that I am hoping to get a degree in public health. And you know, I just really appreciate you guys taking the time. It's really been enlightening and inspiring for me, and I know everybody else here. So let's just give them a round of applause, everybody. Thank you.
We are going to take a quick picture, and then we are going to invite our survivor and Carolyn Timmons to come on up. very much. Panelists, we so appreciate you being here. And now I would like to invite up Carolyn Timmons, who is the manager for our hospital violence intervention program.
Good afternoon, everyone. First, I want to thank the panel again and Dr. Tyson for leading a wonderful discussion this afternoon. Thank you very much for your time and attention to this very important issue. Diana introduced me as the program manager for the Hospital Violence Intervention Program, and I've been at this job for 2 years now. I work with a wonderful team, and I'd like to acknowledge Elaine Hewins. If she would stand, Elaine is the administrator of our grant, and she works very well with me with the cases. I also like to acknowledge Marion Merced, but I understand that she had to leave. She's the director of community health and programs. And again, Diana Stars for putting this together to bring attention to this very important issue. I think if Dr. Teichman had asked me, I would say my hope is what I see in the young lady and her son that I'm going to introduce you to. Trauma begins with empathy and compassion. You have to have it. It's very, very tough when you're going bedside to see a victim who is a victim of gunshot or stabbing or assault, sexual assault, domestic violence. You have to have the right people around you and the right staff to make that first outreach to that patient. And Mayor Cahill said it correctly. It starts at the bedside. So once we get that call or that referral and we go see that patient and the victim, we're going with empathy and compassion to let them know that we care about them and that we're sorry for what happened to them, but we're here to help. As long as they're in the hospital, we would see them every day or every other day and offering services. Once they're discharged, the services could vary. I always ask the patient or the victim, tell me 3 things you want to change as you're on your journey of healing. And the journey is not just for them, it's for the staff and I as well. We're working with them. We're taking that journey with them. And we want to provide the services, whether it's case management, information and referral, and counseling. 2 of our partners are here today that assisted us with the case that I'm going to introduce you to, the Puerto Rican Action Board and their staff, and also Richard Ralph and the staff. They're assisted immediately. So I'm going to ask Amani Reeves and Kason Reeves to come up, and Amani's going to share her story and about the services she's currently receiving. And this is my hope.
Okay, hi, my name is Amani. This is my son, Kason. So Kason is 2 years old. He just turned 2 in March. This is gonna be my first time talking about what happened to my son. So forgive me if it doesn't come out as smoothly. Back in November on the 6th, we went to the park. It was the first day that I felt comfortable enough to do something for me and my son after my mother had passed. So we went to the park. We were playing with his cousins. My cousins were there. There was kids everywhere. It was about 6:10. It was still light outside. It was daylight savings time. So it was still bright outside. I remember we were wearing warm clothes. It was beautiful, it was so beautiful. And then the next thing you know, I let Casey go play with the little basketball, play with the little girl, and I heard just one single shot. And the next thing I know, my brain and my heart were fighting to figure out what exactly happened. My brain knew that I saw a cloud of dust bounce off the ground, and then I watched my son fall. But my heart said, there's no way. I just watched my son get shot at a park in broad daylight. The next thing, it all happened so quickly. I just remember everybody running away and me running straight to him. Everybody is pushing past me and I'm running to him. I don't care if there's more shots coming. I didn't know where the person went. I didn't care about anything but my son. I remember grabbing him. I ran across the street. There was a car door that was open. I just wanted to get to somebody. Somebody needed to help. There was nobody in the car. So I just walked in their house. Their door was open and I just ran inside. Once I had gotten in there, I looked down at my son. He was crying. He wasn't upset or anything. But I saw that his pamper was bright, bright red. And I couldn't figure out what was going on because there was I didn't see any blood or anything like that. I just saw the color on his pamper. So that's when I looked down and I realized that he actually did get hit by that bullet. The bullet had ricocheted off the ground and went through and through. I tried to call 911 a couple of times, maybe about 6 or 7, and my fingers just weren't working. I couldn't get the numbers through. I couldn't push the ring button. I just couldn't do it. So I remember begging and screaming at the people whose house that I ran into, just please call the cops, please call the police, call the ambulance, get them there as soon as they can. It took about 2 minutes, but it was the longest 2 minutes of my life before I saw those blue lights coming down the street. And I just ran him outside. I gave him to the police officer and I said, look, you have to help my son. The cops have their job to do. They wanted to make sure the scene was clear, but I, as a mother, had a job to do too, and it was to protect my son. So I begged him, and I just begged him. I said, the nearest hospital is 30 minutes away. You have to take him now. You have to take him. And he couldn't. He kept telling me, I don't have the clearance. I have to wait for my sergeant. I have to wait for my sergeant. And by the grace of God, the sergeant was about a minute or 2 behind. But again, those 2 minutes feel like a lifetime. Once he saw what had happened, he saw how small he was, he just picked him up. We all ran into the cop car, and we literally were going 110 miles down Main Street to get towards the hospital. I was told a couple weeks after that accident happened that I was in the car grabbing the driver's shoulders and shaking him and telling him, you have to get us there. You have to get us there. I've lost everything this year. I cannot lose the baby. We made it to Piscataway, and the ambulance was about 10 minutes from here. By the time we got in there, my son was fighting harder than I've seen anybody else fight for his life. I was singing to him. I was yelling his name. And I remember the EMT workers telling me, you have to calm down, Mom. He's looking at you for comfort. You have to calm down. That was the hardest thing for me to do. But as soon as I did gain a little self-control, I realized he was looking at me to see what was going on. The EMT worker got a line in, which was a life-saving measure that I'm thankful that they were able to do. Because by the time we made it to the hospital and we walked in the emergency department, they were starting chest compressions on him. And that's the last thing that I remember before I just passed out. Everybody that day was trying to do something, that saved my son's life. Once we got here, the nurses that started the CPR, they brought him straight to the surgeon, where he did surgery for 6.5 hours. According to him, everything was obliterated from the bullet, but he managed to come out after those 6 hours and say, he's here, we still have him, it's gonna be fine. Those next couple days were a blur. The whole time was really a blur. I didn't know how I would get through anything. Between losing my mom and then the accident with my son, I felt like I was just being put through the ringer again and again and again. And that's when I met Miss Carolyn Timmons, who, when I first saw her and I saw her name, I said, this lady is my angel. My mom's name was Carolyn, and she had passed in August. So meeting Miss Timmons was a life-saving measure for myself. I knew I had to be okay for my son, but if it wasn't for the program that Miss Carolyn does, I don't know where my mental health would be. I was able to get access to counseling. I had therapy within a week to help me deal with the trauma and the stress. Everybody that I had met through that journey not only worked tirelessly to save my son, but they saved me without them even knowing. The one thing that I really want everybody to take away from this is bullets don't have a name. Trauma does not have a talk response. And take the help when the help is offered to you, because I would not be mentally strong enough to even speak a sentence about what happened to my son if it weren't for this program and what they've done for me and him. Thank you, Ms. Kevin. I appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone. This is an example of the work that we all do, and I really appreciate your time. And if Diana wants to close it out, as I said again, I don't know who said this, but trauma is not what happens to you, but what happens inside you as a result of what happens to you. Let's keep the focus on this issue, and let's have everyone that we can. And thank you again. Diana?
Wow. First of all, thank you all for sticking it out. We appreciate that. What a discussion that was. Our goal for this summit was to spotlight a wide range of perspectives on gun violence, local, statewide, and through the lenses of advocacy, legislation, and research. And together, we didn't just meet that goal, I really think that we surpassed it. So thank you. As we close, I would like to extend my deepest gratitude to our moderator, Dr. Teichman, wherever she disappeared to. Thank you for guiding us through today's dialogue with clarity and compassion, and to our panelists for your expertise and commitment, which has informed and inspired us all. To our survivor, Imani, her son, your bravery in sharing your story reminds us exactly why this work is so vital. And to Carolyn Timmons for guiding her through this difficult time. To all of our community organizations, thank you for providing resources and real solutions. And to everyone behind the scenes that helped to make this work, your dedication brought this day to life. Before you go, I encourage you to spend time with our 91 of Us display, which on the backside of the divider over there, there's a whole explanation. But I'll tell you that this 91 of Us display was created by Kaylee Nerdy in 2017 for her capstone art project in Washington, D.C. And a big thank you to Tracy, her mom, who provided the opportunity to share it with you today. This display will be up until tomorrow afternoon, so please encourage your friends and colleagues to come down to view it. The display features 132 chairs, each one representing a life lost every day to gun violence in the U.S. right now. 91 of those chairs are draped with colored t-shirts, symbolizing the lives lost to suicide, which is red, blue, homicide, and yellow, unintentional shootings. The remaining 41 chairs sit empty, reflecting the rising toll since this project began. And the signage on the back will tell you about the origin and the significance of this deeply moving installation. So let the summit be a beginning. Let the conversations, connections, and commitments that we forge today move us forward towards safer, stronger communities for all. And if you have not already done so, please visit with our community organizations to learn what they have to offer to our victims and survivors. And thank you all for coming.